on Tuesday and Wednesday. We have a lot of important legislation moving through the House this week. First, all remaining stages of our supermarket bill to end the anti-competitive land wars that stop competitors from setting up shops, tackling one of the causes of higher food prices in New Zealand. We also have the introduction of the UK Free Trade Agreement Bill, a high-quality deal that brings an extra $1 billion boost to our GDP. On Thursday, I'm taking part in events to mark Matariki and will attend Chris Fafoi's valedictory speech. And of course on Friday, a day I suspect many of us are looking forward to, marking New Zealand's first Matariki public holiday. Around the country, children have been learning about the Māori New Year, the stars, the night sky, and preparing for a day with family and friends, celebrating what makes us unique. And while many whānau will already have their Matariki traditions, some won't. In the years to come, I look forward to seeing the new traditions that take shape to celebrate Matariki. The rest of the world too will get a taste of Matariki and New Zealand, as Kiwis abroad in over 20 countries mark the day, with events in places like New York, Dublin, Canberra and Manila. And finally, on Sunday, I can confirm that I will be departing for Europe in my third trade mission this year to help advance our economic recovery and grow our exports and tourism. As I did for my trips to Japan and Singapore and the US, I take with me the simple, important message that New Zealand is open for business, travel, education, and for skilled workers and occupations we need. The key focus will be lending a hand to conclude the EU free trade deal as we enter the closing stages of negotiations. The EU is our fourth largest trading partner. I've been working on this agreement remotely for some time and have had bilateral discussions with the likes of the Chancellor of Germany, the President of Spain, and several other EU leaders in recent weeks and months to ensure we secure a deal that improves market access for our products and services. I look forward to progressing talks in person next week. Our economic recovery from COVID-19 has been export-led, and this is the prime time to cement further free trade agreements, in addition to the ones we've negotiated already, including the UK FTA, the CPTPP, our China FTA upgrade, and the conversations we have had with the US about an Indo-Pacific economic framework. While the trip has been long planned, it coincides now with the NATO Leaders Summit in Madrid, which I've been invited to attend on behalf of New Zealand as a NATO partner. NATO was a treaty for its age when it began over 70 years ago in the aftermath of World War II. And with the instability faced by the region at present, New Zealand is keen to be a part of discussions to support the peace and security of all democratic nations. We will be discussing key security issues for the Indo-Pacific, but in addition, it will also be an opportunity to have a series of bilaterals with other European leaders who are expected to attend. I'll then be joined by Trade and Export Growth Minister Damien O'Connor in Brussels to, as I've said, progress with EU leaders, our EU FTA. I'll have meetings in Brussels with the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and the President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola. I hope to talk with the President of the European Council, Charles Michel. In London, I will again meet with Prime Minister Boris Johnson to reconnect our two countries' close links and to update one another on the progress made since signing our New Zealand-UK FTA earlier this year. Also in London, I will meet with the Duke of Cambridge and give a foreign policy speech at the international think tank Chatham House. In Brussels and London, we'll be joined for some elements of the programme by New Zealand business representatives. Following that 5-day program, on the weekend of the 2nd of July, I will travel directly to Australia for a trade mission that includes the annual Australia-New Zealand Leadership Forum, where I'll be accompanied by a number of other ministers and a large business delegation. This is an exciting opportunity for us as the forum has been delayed for several years due to COVID, so it marks another important step in our reconnecting plan. Australia is our largest market for tourists and second largest for exports. It is the most significant market for our small and medium-sized businesses looking to grow their offerings. And so in Melbourne and Sydney, I'll be helping to promote a number of trade and tourism opportunities. Our borders being open once again, and of course the removal of pre-departure testing from midnight tonight, creates real opportunities for our recovery, which will be the focus of both trips. Further details on Australia will be provided closer to the time. happy to take your questions. Jessica.
Prime Minister, you say that you're in the closing stages of the EU FTA. Is that a done deal?
As I say, closing stages. We've been talking for some time with a number of EU leaders and representatives around bringing this agreement closer to conclusion. But my trip is very much focused around lending a hand to supporting those negotiations.
Are you basically just going over to sign it?
No, I would not say that. We are still in the midst of negotiations, but this trip has been purposely timed around this period to make sure that we continue the momentum of the negotiation.
What are you doing with the Duke of Cambridge?
It's tradition that we tend to touch base with representatives of the family based on the availability. The Duke of Cambridge is someone that over the course of my time in this role, I've had the privilege of getting to know, so it will be an opportunity to touch base.
Prime Minister, does
participating
in the NATO Leaders Summit mean that New Zealand is actually going to be drawn closer to that alliance?
No. It means we have been, for the last roughly 10 years, a NATO partner. We've worked alongside NATO in other areas before. And of course, in this current war in Ukraine, you'll have seen that New Zealand has, through the NATO Trust Fund, supported the distribution of aid and support. But again, we maintain the status that we've had for the last 10 years.
And just given that most of the nuclear weapons in the world are held by NATO members, will you be using that opportunity to raise New Zealand's anti-nuclear stance?
New Zealand is utterly consistent on the issue of nuclear weapons. We have long been advocates not only around seeing a reduction in the number of nuclear weapons, but ultimately a prohibition. Our view is the world is not safer by any increase or indeed the presence of nuclear weapons in the world. That is a status that we have consistently advocated as a proud nuclear-free nation.
So will you be using that summit to
You'll find that I present that position in most bilaterals that I have where it's relevant. So yes, and I'll continue to promote that position. We're actually at a really critical time as well. You'll know that the Treaty on Prohibition is coming up for its critical gathering. And at the current point that we're at in the world where we see this increase in instability, our concern is that some nations may look to nuclear weapons as a means of giving a greater sense of security. Our view is the opposite. Nuclear weapons present a less safe world for all of us. Now is the time to move away, not to see an escalation in their use or production.
Just lastly, which
Jason.
European leaders are you working to have bilateral meetings?
A number. Of course, this is one of the opportunities that the NATO summit represents. It will be a gathering of those EU leaders. What otherwise might be a more protracted trade mission as we move our way around the EU actually becomes very efficient as we look to engage with those who are attending the summit. But we'll give you a few more details a little closer to the time. Yeah, Jason.
In your opening remarks, you mentioned, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that something to do with the UK Free Trade Agreement is going before the House this week?
Yep.
Yeah, well, so if...
It's a normal process, the bill. Obviously, we sign up and then the bill goes, then we have the bill come forward through the process and, of course, the scrutiny that comes with it.
Why is that happening before the deal has actually been signed?
This is the normal process. So we, of course, go through an in-principle agreement. Then you see all the legal drafting, the bills before Parliament, and this, of course, the Select Committee scrutiny and the House scrutiny of the text.
And so what is it exactly that you plan to do over there to get the deal over the line that Damien O'Connor couldn't do by himself or trade officials couldn't do by themselves?
Sorry, how do you mean?
Going over there, it was your presence?
No, this is to check in on the progress made since our signing. And so this is to touch base with the Prime Minister on not just, of course, the progress we've made since signing the UK FTA, but, of course, on our... Oh, sorry, on the EU. No, so what's before the House is the UK FTA. Forgive me, I may have misspoken. But
Prime Minister,
So just on that vein, again, same question. What is it that you can do to get the EU free trade agreement over the line that officials and the Trade Minister can't?
No, I think the point to make here is that with any trade negotiation, we work collaboratively. You'll have the trade minister often coming in with counterparts at a very detailed level. The role that I've played, because keep in mind, of course, this is not a bilateral arrangement. We are not just working with one country. We are looking to garner the support of a wide range of EU members. So I'll often come in with support, touch base with a range of different leaders where either they've been supportive to garner their wider support to get us through the process, or where there have been particular sticking points to touch base with their leaders to see how I can support getting us through those. It is a team effort. That is the same with every trade negotiation, but we now are at a critical juncture where our view is now is the time to come into the EU.
Points.
I'd rather leave them, if I may, to the negotiating table.
Agricultural exporters and New Zealand agricultural exporters have raised concerns that very little progress on the FTA has been made since the market access offer was leaked in 2020. What, I guess, assurance can you give to agricultural exporters in New Zealand that they will be better off under this EU FTA?
Of course, the point of these arrangements are to reduce the barriers, whether or not it's tariffs, whether or not it's in-tariff quotas that have been problematic for a number of years. We're always seeking to gain greater access and eased friction at the border. And so that is the focus of these negotiations too. As I say, we are in negotiations, and so I would rather leave officials to canvass directly with their counterparts the individual detail and issues that we're raising. But I would point out this is not just a bilateral arrangement, so there is an additional complexity where, of course, within the EU, there's a significant interest in dairy, in beef, and a range of other areas that do make these negotiations particularly complex, but we have always gone in strong with New Zealand's best interest.
And Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has been invited to visit Kiev at some point. Have you received a similar invitation, and is that something that you would be looking to do?
No, nor have we sought one. And you know, in our view, that what is happening on the ground there at this present time, being on the ground would not change the position that we have taken as a government, which is a very firm one. And you can see across logistical support, across personnel, humanitarian, visas, across every single ambit of support that New Zealand can provide, we are providing it. We see from a distance the extraordinary impact this war is having on the civilian population and the nation of Ukraine. We're wary, though, about drawing resource in order to make a personal visit.
You haven't received an invitation?
No, nor have we sought one.
The way that the Bethlehem
I have seen general statements, inviting people, but for us, and this is, again, individual countries, it will be their own assessment and, of course, their own relationships that will be a part of those decisions. But for us, I'm very mindful, this is a country at war. And we are here providing support. Being up closer in proximity would not change the level of significant support that we are already providing.
The NATO Secretary General last week said he expects at the upcoming summit NATO will give agree to a comprehensive aid package or assistance package for Ukraine. What sort of additional assistance is the New Zealand government willing to provide Ukraine in the weeks and months ahead?
Here and now, obviously, I don't have any further announcements to make, but if we reflect on the contributions that we've made to date, it has been comprehensive. Taken as a whole, there's very few countries who are making a contribution around every element, including, for instance, personnel, alongside even equipment and humanitarian aid. So the fact that we're training forces in the UK, that we have logistical support, that we have had our C-130 on the ground, that we've provided funding for greater satellite technology to support intelligence and decision making for their military operation, visas, helmets, flak jackets, it is really across the board, regardless of our geographic distance. We've seen what this represents for the world, and we've done our bit. We are keeping a longer term view to what is the ongoing role that we can play. This is going to be a protracted conflict. I think our focus is how can we get closer to diplomatic diplomacy-led resolution. We're obviously not at that point right now, and that's why we're also looking about how can we use those multilateral institutions, how can we use the International Criminal Court to ensure that we have that accountability as well, because obviously there's been failures around the Security Council. So we're looking to how we can lend our support in that area too. So it will be ongoing. So we'll keep looking at what we can provide.
What do you think of former Defence Minister Ron Mark saying he will return to Ukraine?
Look, you've already heard my view on, the kinds of things we need to consider in the current. It's a war zone. And so that is not to say that there is not a place for engagement. Absolutely there is. There is a role for leaders to play in those face-to-face dialogue and those visits, because of course many of them are engaged in diplomatic efforts to bring an end to the conflict. But we're pretty judicious in our calls on Ukraine's time, given the fact that they are in the middle of a war.
If NATO leaders at the summit ask New Zealand to provide more assistance, what will you say?
Well, again, we've already indicated that our assistance will be something that we consider for across the duration of the conflict. So we've never said that this is the end of our commitment or our support. We keep looking at the evolution of the conflict. Keep in mind, our support has not just come through the NATO Trust Fund. We've sought multiple areas, and so we want to make sure that we maintain that ability from New Zealand's perspective, because these are independent decisions made by us, to look at not just the NATO Trust Fund as a means of delivering support, but also bilaterally, and whether those surrounding countries who are taking on a lot of the impact of refugees, whether or not that should be an area we also look to lend support.
In the wake of the Bethlehem College scandal in Tauranga, are you concerned that some integrated schools might be in breach of the agreements they signed with the Ministry of Education by sneaking in rules on transgender kids and marriage?
I take a very, very simple view of this. Schools in New Zealand are obliged to ensure that they have a safe and inclusive environment for all children. And obviously, some quite serious concerns have been raised around whether or not that is the case for the school in question. The Ministry of Education have been asked by ministers to go and look in greater detail over whether or not that obligation is being met. So I'll leave the ministry to do that job. But again, every school has to be a safe and inclusive environment. It's the least we can expect in New Zealand.
Have you, or will you seek assurances from the Ministry of Education that this isn't a broader problem, that other integrated schools might also be sneaking this sort of stuff into their
I imagine that perhaps as part of their consideration of some of the concerns that are being raised, that they may well look more broadly. But look, at the moment, as I understand, they've been asked to look at some specific examples, and they are doing that.
Prime Minister, on the EU free trade agreement, are you prepared for New Zealand to walk away from a deal which is a low-quality deal? Because the beef and dairy exporters seem to be saying the Europeans haven't offered much and it's sort of pointless to do the deal.
Yeah. And again, I am mindful of what I say from this podium when we're in the middle of negotiations, because I do want to preserve our position, and it's important for me that I don't jeopardise those negotiations in any way. But of course, what we are seeking is an improvement on the status quo. We want a situation where there is greater resilience for our exporters built out of greater diversification. Now, it's our job to open as many doors as possible. The EU is an important market where in some cases it is just not a level playing field at present. Ask our kiwi fruit exporters who face significant tariffs relative to, for instance, their Chilean competitors. So it is an area where we have been very keen to see movement for some time, but it is a complex area to negotiate with a number of existing, as you can imagine, interests. And for us, it will be about making sure that we can get that door open and make that meaningful progress.
And just on inflation and building materials, are you concerned that a company with 94% market share appears to be crippling the building sector with its failure to deliver enough GIB? Could the government or should the government intervene perhaps in the same way it's thinking of intervening to break up the supermarkets?
Well, we've already indicated some time ago that we're concerned around the issue of building supplies in New Zealand. That's something that is already on our agenda. But looking specifically at the question of GIB and access to it, yes, I am concerned, obviously. We have a focus as a government on building more houses, given that we have been tackling a housing crisis, and anything in terms of building supplies that stands in the way of that, yes, we're of a mind to make sure that we play our role in addressing where that is viable. The new Minister Wood, I was just discussing this with Minister Woods today. I imagine she'll have more to say on it this week.
Minister, has Paul Eagle given you any indication that he's planning to run for mayor?
I have nothing new to comment on or add on Paul Eagle.
When do you expect to hear from an electorate MP on when they might be planning to...
Again, nothing further to add on that question.
A by-election?
Again, as I've said, I've got nothing further to add on that. We often have lots of speculation. It's up to individuals to speak to their own plans.
Do you think you would make a good mayor of Wellington?
Again, I'm not going to get into speculation. Yeah.
Prime Minister, how are you concerned about the hospital's ability to cope with flu this season?
Look, you will have heard me actually from here some months ago talk about our concern that with our borders opening and the absence of flu from within our population for the last 2 years, that the impact of flu, winter respiratory illness and COVID-19 had the potential to put extraordinary pressure on our hospitals. We anticipated that, and that we are seeing that borne out. At the moment, we've seen flu, for instance, overtake COVID as a source of hospitalisations in terms of respiratory illnesses. So you can see it is a significant issue for us this season. There are things that we can do. Obviously, in counties Manukau, where they've seen significant pressure, they've moved to try and ease that by extending weekend hours for GP clinics, and I want to thank those GPs for the extra work that has gone in to provide that when they have been under considerable pressure themselves, and also free clinics to try and encourage the uptake of that, rather than presenting in emergency departments where it is a non-acute situation. I've had a call this morning, which is part of my regular weekly check-in on the status, our COVID-19 response, talking to some of the medical officers of health involved in some of those initiatives. We'll look to see next week the impact it has had, but it does appear to have had some, to see whether or not, for instance, there's more we could learn from that. My plea, though, to New Zealanders is please take flu seriously. It is a serious illness. It is causing significant hospitalisations across the country on top of COVID-19. We do need more people to go and get that flu vaccine. We've increased the availability. We've increased the number of people who can get it for free. And now my ask is that people go and take that up. My other ask is that people keep using their masks. They have dual benefit. Yes, we've primarily used them for COVID, but they're also a tool to try and stop and slow down the spread of flu, which this winter season is really critical.
And also, it's World Refugee Day today. New Zealand has one of the lowest per capita refugee numbers in the world. We're 95th. Why is that?
But some of the best reintegration and integration programs for refugees who come into New Zealand, and recognised for that. Of course, when we came in as government, we doubled our refugee quota because we recognised there was more that we needed to do to play our part as a member of the international community. COVID-19 and closed borders placed some constraint on our ability to keep pace with the plan we had for that growth, but now that those borders are open, we're gearing back up again.
And as the number of refugees increase around the world, is increasing our refugee quota in the future something you'd like to see?
Well, what I would say is not only have you seen us as a government double the number of refugees that we take within the quota system, we have also separately to that taken a number of individuals who have found themselves in extreme circumstances in Afghanistan, and making sure that where, for instance, the need is acute, we've acted quickly, even if that means going outside the traditional refugee program, which often takes more time. You see the same with Ukraine opening up visas to help support individuals in those circumstances. And we've also supported, with the recent uptake of Australia, of a specific allocation of those who are refugees and who have been on Nauru or within Australia waiting to find a home.
New Zealand has posted another record, I think, near record fuel importer cost in terms of the cost of importing fuel.
Yeah.
How likely is it that you will extend the 25% excise cut if that high fuel price persists?
Yeah, ministers are being asked, as you can imagine, we've been asked about this a number of times. It is true that we continue to see huge volatility in the market. The price of oil has increased and we are seeing that being passed on at the pump. We've kept a close eye to ensure that the excise reduction of 25 cents a litre is being passed on to consumers, and we will continue to monitor what's happening in the market right through to August, which is the point at which the excise reduction was due to phase out. We haven't made any change in decision at this stage, but we are continuing to monitor what's happening there.
Minister Wood said it was difficult, officials did advise that it was difficult to phase it out, and it really was quite a binary decision between keeping it off and putting it all on.
Yeah.
I mean, are you likely to try and phase it out?
Yeah, so what she's pointing out is just the implementation difficulty of doing anything other than some just quite simple reductions. But what you'll have seen in the budget is that we have taken an approach of trying to ease the pressure in a number of ways. We had the 25 cents per litre reduction that comes through till essentially the beginning of August. That's the same time that we bring in the cost of living payment for everyone who's on 70,000 or less. So we really thought about the sequencing of those two things, but we will also continue to monitor what's happening in the market at the time of those decisions.
Fuel continues to be this high, you'd say?
We haven't been so blanket as to make calls around what thresholds have to be met, just rather that we would keep an ongoing watch on what is happening in the market and what's happening overall in New Zealand's context. As well, you'll see that we're not the only ones in the same situation. In many countries, it has been time limited because of the volatility, but also because it is hundreds of millions that we're having to replace to ensure that we continue to invest in projects that we've already committed to, and for instance, road safety, which is also critical, and that's what ultimately the excise pays for.
You've said that.
I'll come to. Just more, and then I'll come back to you, Bernard, and then Amelia.
On masks, at the start of the Omicron outbreak, Minister Hipkins said he would look into subsidising them, particularly respirators, which are N95s and KF94s. Do you know where that work has gotten to, and is that something the government would still look to do to make sure that low-income families can afford the best masks?
Forgive me, I need to go back and check on where that particular request is at. We did distribute masks through community providers, so those and rapid antigen tests as well. So essentially COVID hygiene packs and care packs that our community providers have been distributing often to very low income families. So that did occur. A big focus for us has been on whether or not we've got the mask availability, for instance, within our school networks, and we've asked for a bit more advice on that. But I'll need to check in on anything broader that the Minister requested.
With flu and COVID cases rising over winter, is the government going to look at reinstating masks in schools as a blanket policy? Keep in mind,
COVID is coming down. We actually now are seeing cases back where that we haven't seen since February. So we're also seeing a reduction in hospitalisations and a reduction in ICU numbers. The issue we have is that it's been rapidly replaced by flu. And we have seen a consistent pattern in New Zealand where there is strain in our hospital system over the winter period, but it is now even more so as a result of the fact of us not having had flu for a number of years. Add to that existing other respiratory illnesses we see seasonally and COVID, and it's incredibly difficult for our health workforce, who are themselves often dealing with illness which affects their staffing levels. So a number of measures that we're looking at. We've seen some creative solutions, but we also need New Zealanders to play their part. Please don't think that just because you had COVID, a mask is not important for you anymore. It is. It plays a really important role in keeping one another safe across winter illnesses at the moment.
Just on masks in schools.
Masks in schools. I've heard quite a few competing views on the issue. We come back to having sought advice from officials. We'll look to give a view at the same time as we share an outcome on the CPF framework settings. Yeah.
Just on the fuel taxes, you mentioned that you were checking to see that the levy cut had been passed on by the fuel companies. Yeah. Has it been passed on?
I've seen nothing to contradict that to date, and nor have I had the Minister raise that it's been an issue. She does get weekly reporting to ensure that we're seeing that pass on. You are still seeing across the country, though, quite a bit of variation in pricing, and I see that as I move around the country as well. And so that's something that, demonstrates again that competition also helps.
Prime Minister.
Yeah, John, and then, sorry, I did say I'd come to Amelia, then John, and then I might wrap with Joe if there's no other. Yep.
Thank you. Just given the constraints on the health workforce, how much longer do you anticipate that vaccination mandate being in place for that wider workforce?
I don't consider that to be having a significant issue in terms of our workforce because it was a very, very small percentage of the workforce who opted out of vaccinations.
There could be a concern that more people aren't going to that workforce because of that mandate?
I've seen nothing to suggest that that's the case. And of course, I would hope that those who are interested in a career in medicine would be driven by the collective care of others, which the focus on vaccination has all been about. Yeah. Okay, John.
In light of the High Court declaration last week in the Grounded Kiwis case, when might the government actually apologise to people who are disadvantaged by the MIQ system?
Look, I understand what we've taken a look at is where they're finding the findings of the court, which was relatively narrow, and actually essentially relates to those areas where we were trying to respond to concerns that the system wasn't fair, and that's the area where the court has found that the system could have been better. And so I will leave it though to ministers to respond in a bit more detail.
Why keep dragging it out? Why not just say
no, not dragging it out.
It's going to appeal or not?
No, not dragging it out. Always just making sure that we give due consideration, which are, of course, to issues that are very deeply felt, that have been given due consideration by the courts, and we need to do the same in our response as well.
Is the concern that you would be opening yourself up to compensation plans?
No. Okay, Joe, I'll finish with you.
The next booster shot, the fourth shot.
Yep.
There's obviously been signalling for some time from Dr. Bloomfield around, when that will happen and when is the right time to do it and who the right groups are.
Yep.
Are you concerned about, what the take-up will be around that shot, and particularly at the moment with the messaging around flu and how many people are in hospital with flu, whether that might somewhat distract and whether people might sort of start to see the flu as the priority as opposed to COVID?
There may be those who have a closer insight to because there is demand. There are people who are asking, and so they would be in a better position to demonstrate whether or not there's a concern around uptake. I think it will be a bit harder for us to model our expectation around the level of uptake we might expect, given the amount of COVID infection we've had in New Zealand. And the fact that there is guidance around seeking additional doses when you've had proximity to an infection. So it might be a bit harder for us to judge whether we've reached all those that we would anticipate or would like to. What I do know is that a particular focus is our older population, of course, aged residential care, and those who are immunocompromised. There's really clear areas where we know the benefits are clear and it will make a difference. Okay, thanks everyone. block, and I'm in the House on Tuesday and Wednesday. We have a lot of important legislation moving through the House this week. First, all remaining stages of our supermarket